I'm your host, Sal Guardo. With me, as always, our co-host, Hall of Fame quarterback Kurt Hess, former defensive end Kyle Searle, former director of football operations Dan Cobb, and we have an extremely special guest, the Godfather himself, Jim Tressel, has honored us to come on the show. We are going to give him a proper introduction here shortly, but just a couple quick notes and a word from our sponsor. First, just really for our audience, in case it hasn't hit them just yet, we are 28 days away from kicking off at Villanova. Therefore, I know it's been a long off season. Our podcast will be on every week leading up to opening day and throughout the season. We still have 2024 predictions, power rankings, and a Villanova preview week after week after week to hit until we kick off there. Extremely excited. But Kurt, I'm going to turn it over to you to, I guess, hit the latest on the preseason.
Yeah, Sal, as you mentioned, we're 26 days away from kickoff, which means our team has reported they're here for camp. They're getting ready to work. They're already at it, but just want to give some recognition to 5 of the Penguins on the roster right now. Tyshawn King and Jason Williams are our first team preseason All-Missouri Valley. Max Tomczak is second team preseason. And then honorable mention, Sam Merriman, long snapper, and then our kicker, Andrew Lastovka. So we know how those preseason accolades go, right? They're nice. They're probably things that we deserved from the year prior. So really it's all about the end of the season accolades and more of those team accolades at the end of the season. But want to recognize those guys and say that we're kind of leaning on those guys this season coming up.
Thank you, Curdy. One more thing. If y'all remember, we had Patty Viverito, our conference commissioner of the Missouri Valley Conference, the only commissioner. She was on with us last offseason, and she had mentioned one more year in her contract, and she has officially announced she will be retiring at the end of the year. She did mention to us on that show that she did want to get women's flag football started as a NCAA sport. So if she still is going to pursue that, we wish her good luck and thank her for everything she's done for our conference. Over to Searle just for a word for our sponsor, and then we'll get going with our guest.
Thanks, Sal. So the podcast brought to you by Leiden Oil Company. Over 105 years of delivering quality fuels and lubricants all over Ohio, Michigan, and Western PA there. Paul and Laura Leiden, Paul Jr., Jennifer, are longtime Penguin supporters on and off campus. And just a quick little blurb about that. I went to the office Tuesday, and Paul had just painted a fresh Pete the Penguin and Block Y right in the entrance of the parking lot to the building. So with that being said, Paul is a true Penguin through and through, and he believes in his mission statement, fueling the best for success.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, Sal, let me jump in on the Leidens now, because you guys are too young to remember this, except for Cop maybe. But so when we got to Youngstown State in 1986, there were 200 beds on campus. That's all the dorms we had, 200 beds. And we had almost 15,000 students. And it was Mr. Leiden Sr., who we went to with the plea that if we're really going to turn this into something special as an institution and as a football program, we're going to need more dorms. And that's when they gifted for the building of the Leiden House, which was finished in 1991. And then onto the Cafaro House and, all the apartments. And now instead of 200 people sleeping on or around campus, we have about 2,500 people, which is a total change. And had it not been for the Leiden family, that would have never happened.
And on that note, Searle, Kurt, and myself all lived in the Leiden dorms. And if you really need to experience college, you need to live in the Leiden dorms freshman year, because that is a fun way to kick off your college experience. Yep. Love that. Let's transition. All right, over to Dan. Do the honors.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Sal. And thanks to our guest. How do you introduce the man we have on here tonight?
Quickly.
No, we're going to give you a proper little shout out here, but you think about all that he's done for what we're going to talk about tonight, the football program in the university, and you look at. Fortunately, I was a student during those heydays there of the '90s, and I mean, 37 years of coaching from Akron to Miami of Ohio, Syracuse, Ohio State, and then to YSU before you're back to Ohio State. Am I right on that, Coach?
Yeah.
Syracuse was your only time outside of Ohio. So the things we all know, 5 national championships. Fortunately, the majority of those were right here at YSU. 4 of them, of course, 1 at the Shoe, Buckeyes there. And, I think some people know, but I think it's cool. We all love football, and I'm the son of a coach, and Coach Tressel and his dad, Lee, the only father-son members of the National Football Foundation Hall of Fame. I think that says so much, too, about his family. And the Hall of Fames there's a long list. Baldwin Wallace, where you were quarterback for your dad, right, Coach? There for all-conference quarterback. Kurt, he was throwing it around before you were. So, and that's when they ran the ball like 60 times a game. So, and then
shoot. We ran the run and shoot.
There you go. See,
okay.
The Baldwin Wallace Hall of Fame, the YSU Hall of Fame, the Ohio State Hall of Fame. I think his coaching tree is another testament to the man that from high school to universities to the NFL, the coaches that have been on his staffs and where they are and what they've done is just remarkable. And I think, something that I remember back, this is before, the other guys on this show are really young, Kurt, Sal, and Kyle, Coach. So back in the day when the pocket schedules would come out, he had set such a standard of success that the playoff dates, the first round of the playoffs and the national title game were on our schedules we gave out. I don't know if they're still doing that, but I remember growing up like, well, yeah, YSU is going to be in the playoffs and you better save November and a December date for the national title. That's just how, he had set the bar. And affectionately, you are known as the Godfather on this show, Coach. I think we got to give Sal some credit. He's a Florida transplant, and he actually came to YSU because growing up, he watched you on TV with the sweater vest, and came here when Coach Haycock was the head coach. But I think probably more so than anything, the blessing I've had is working under him at my time with the university. Is he's such an encourager, a transformational leader, a difference maker. But I've learned from him that if you're going to be successful in life, he's always preached you got to be consistent and you got to be selfless. And a Youngstown native, and you guys are all adopted sons of Youngstown now, that nobody has been more consistent and more selfless to not just Youngstown State, but our Valley, the university. It's just been incredible. So to have you on here tonight is a real honor. It's kind of legitimizing this show. I mean, we've been kind of on the, we're legit now. So we got the man on here, and
Strollo, you had Strollo.
Well, come on. Now Ron would probably agree with that statement that he brought it to the higher end. But that's just a little bit about the man and what he's accomplished, and more so the lives he's affected. And we'll get into that a little later. So, Coach, if you could give us a quick little update of things going on in your busy life. And I forgot to mention, he's really, the real deal is he's married to, Ellen Tressel. So really, he's the sidekick to the former first lady. So that's the real deal. So
that's right. Well, I carry her golf bag around. That's about the highest position I have over in this house. But I think all the time about the blessing and the good fortune to have had a chance to come to Youngstown State and experience a community that just fell in love with their football team and supported us amazingly. And it's my greatest memories certainly happened, many of them in that ice castle, and really our greatest victories are as I watch what our guys are doing today, and the men they've become, the husbands, the fathers, the professional careers they've had in a variety of fields, and that's why when we had a chance to come back to take on the presidency, I mean, there was no question in my mind that I owed that. Whether I thought I could do it or not, I didn't know for sure, but I knew I owed that to the university and to the community, and it will always be a special place to us.
We're going to dive in. Well, really two segments. First one's really your coaching career, then really your post-coaching career as president. So we're going to really go from throw it all. So I guess my first question, I really want to try to paint the picture for the listeners from day one when you first showed up on campus in the mid 80s. What was Youngstown State football like as far as facilities, salary, your staff? Were they full-time? Were they part-time? Did you have to teach classes? What? Because college football today is a multi-billion-dollar industry. What was Youngstown State like in the 80s?
Well, when I was an assistant coach for 11 years, one of the goals I always had was seeing if I could become a head coach. And when the Youngstown State job opened, I went right to Coach Bruce. It was our head coach at Ohio State. And I said, hey, would you mind calling Youngstown? And he did. He called Joe Malmaser, who was the athletic director. And Joe said, well, we've got some names. We don't really have any interest. And so I thought, well, okay, I was young, but at least I tried. And I had always had the utmost respect for Youngstown State because my dad's teams back in the 60s had great games from Baldwin Wallace versus Youngstown State. And I remember coming over as a little kid. They played on Thursday nights at Rayen High School and stuff like that. We didn't have a stadium, obviously, then. And so, I had great respect for them. Then I had a chance to coach against them, against the Penguins when I was at Akron. And Youngstown had great teams, the Flea and Stout and, all those guys and some amazing games. And so when that job came open, I was like, man, I know you can win there because I know what that group's all about. Well, it didn't look like it was going to happen, but excuse me, as fate would have it, a bunch of people turned the job down, and sometimes that's how you get a job is not because you're wonderful, but it's because the list, disappeared. And so 3 weeks later, I was out recruiting. I was in Los Angeles. I was recruiting a quarterback in Santa Monica. And I got to the LAX airport. And back then you called the office for your messages. We didn't have cell phones or any of that business. And so I was on a payphone calling the office and the secretary said, hey, Coach Bruce wants to talk to you. And I thought, ooh, I don't know if that's good or not because we didn't beat Michigan that year. And you're always, on pins and needles. And so anyway, he jumped on the phone and said, hey, you need to call Joe Malmaser. You might get an interview. And it was like, wow. And I remember getting ready for the interview and I had all kinds of stuff made and handouts and, oh man, I was ready. And the night before I went, I called Sam Ratigliano, who was the coach of the Browns. And I said, Sam, do you have any advice, and going for this interview? And he says, yeah, whatever you do, don't bring anything. And I had all this brilliance prepared. And he said, you need to be conversational. You need to convince them you know what you're doing. And it's not like you had to go copy something from someone or whatever. And I said, oh, man, I got all this stuff prepared. And he said, well, you can take your stuff with you. And he said, find someone on the staff that has a thin leather briefcase. He says, don't take some big satchel or whatever. You need to look like you're a professional. So Coach Mason had a thin leather briefcase. And so I put my stuff in there. And he said, now take that with you. Don't bring it out until you're leaving. And when you're leaving, flip open your briefcase and give them the stuff that you had prepared. And, hopefully it's what you talked about, So boy, I followed his directions and so forth, and got done with the interview. I thought it was fine. I didn't know. I'd never interviewed for a head coaching job, and at the end of the day, I gave the stuff to Coach Malmazer, and he said, "Well, we'll call you right around the new year." And I think I interviewed on like December 18th or something like that, and he said, some of our board members are going holiday break and this and that. And he said, you go enjoy your bowl game, and we'll get back to you. Well, the next day he called and he said, we'd like to offer you the job. And, I was so excited. Um, I remember on my interview walking into Stambaugh Stadium, which was pretty new then. It was built in 1982. This was 1986. And I walked through that big gym in there, and I thought, my goodness, we've got our own indoor facility, and because we didn't have an indoor facility per se at Ohio State at the time. We used the old French field house, which was connected to the arena, and it was nothing to write home. I said, man, we got our own indoor facility inside the building, and I thought I died and went to heaven, and that's that's the way I approached it. As if Danny will tell you, one of my key mantras is paradise is where I am, and I thought I was in paradise, and it was so much fun getting to know the guys and dreaming and talking about what is it going to take to realize these dreams, again, it thrill of a lifetime to be the head coach at Youngstown State for 15 years. As far as salaries go, you asked about salaries.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was making $42,000 at Ohio State as an assistant coach, and they offered me 40 to be the head coach at Youngstown State, and I said, I'm there. I don't care. You could offer me 20. It didn't matter. And my staff, we were allowed, I don't know if it was an NCAA rule or just Mr. Malmazer's rule, but we were allowed 5 full-time coaches, and 2 of the 5 were ones that he mandated that I keep from the current staff. One was Rick Beverly, who was a great Youngstown native, North High School legend, played at Ohio U, had coached for years at YSU. And the other was Bob Dove, who one of maybe the greatest player that ever played, in the Valley. First player selected in the NFL draft, 2-time All-American at Notre Dame. And he needed 1 more year for retirement. So I was able to bring 3 full-time coaches. So I brought Coach Knatzer, who I had been with at Syracuse, and he was just leaving San Diego State. And I brought Coach Bowman, who I'd been with at Miami, who was just leaving NC State. And I brought Coach D'Antonio, who I had been with at Ohio State. He was a grad assistant and then was coaching at Akron. And Coach Dennison had just got let go at Akron. And so Mark was looking for a job. And then I was allowed 1 part-timer, and I brought Don Treadwell, who I had coached at Miami of Ohio. 3 of those 4, later became, legendary in their own right. And 2 of them head coaches. Coach D'Antonio, of course, is going into the College Hall of Fame this year from his time at UC and Michigan State. And Don Treadwell was the head coach at Miami of Ohio. And then, of course, everyone knows Coach Knatzer. I mean, he was the man. He was truly the man. And Coach Bowman spent, 30-some years in the NFL and college football, and was with us at Ohio State when we went back there. And so that was my staff. And we had a couple, I guess you called them GAs or whatever, but I think they made $100 a month. My staff all made like 20. But, it was a different time.
Much different time. And when we interview some of your players on this show, we haven't met Coach Knatzer, or at least I hadn't, but he's spoken about more than you have. So he's definitely someone we got to get on the show.
He's Coach Knatzer was the man. If you're a head coach or if you run a company or whatever, if you're in a leadership position, you need someone on your staff who will come into your office and close the door and undress you and take you to task. And that
Mhm.
was Coach Knatzer for me. When he walked in the door and closed it behind him, I knew I was in for a ripping. And as did the players know when he walked in their direction, or when he walked into the equipment room, Carmen Cassis was shaking. I mean, he was shivering. And but yeah, Coach Knatzer was the man. He told me he was going to stay 1 year. Was when I asked him to come, I said, "Look, get back on this side of the Rockies. You'll go to some big time place, but spend a year with us and just help us get this thing started." He spent all 15. And he still lives in Youngstown, Ohio.
Yep.
Cyril, over to you.
Thanks, Sal. Quick, President Trussell, before I get into my scripted question here for you, I called Paul Lydon today, said, "Hey, you're going to be on the show," and if he had anything to say to you or ask you. And
This young Paul or old Paul?
Senior, so
Senior.
old Paul.
Okay.
Don't say I called him old Paul.
Okay.
But he, just to reference back to the start of your time at YSU, he talks about all the time of you coming in and him walking you and Joe Malmazur down to meet his dad, and if you had any memories and what you took away from that first meeting with Bill Lydon. And I think you already kind of alluded to some of it.
Well, that
before.
first meeting, we weren't talking about dorms. He was just making it clear that I better fall in love with his hometown, and that I better do something special for his hometown, and that at the time, that was 1986. That was only 8 or 9 years after Black Monday, and the town, was, had gone through an amazing time, and was still kind of disarray. And he said, "You better do something, to help this town." But I was so scared walking back in there because Mr. Malmazer told me, he said, "Hey, whatever you do, don't open your mouth, and don't whatever, just nod your head and say yes, sir." But Mr. Lydon, you talk about godfathers. Godfathers are people like Mr. Lydon and Mr. Malmazer. They're not me. I'll tell you that.
Very cool. Very cool. I'll share that with Paul.
Well, I'm sure he's tuned in.
I don't know. I think he always watches it the next day, the next morning.
All right.
But I'll give him a hard time if he's not tuned in live here.
Okay.
But getting back to my question, the winner's manual, a staple of college football. Can you kind of explain and walk us through how you built that philosophy and were able to implement it successfully in 2 different locker rooms and have the ultimate success with it in winning national championships?
I think I was kind of paying attention when my dad was coaching as I was growing up, but you're a kid. But then when I was an assistant coach, I was really trying to pay attention and learn everything I could learn. And I worked for 4 amazing guys. All were different. I took different things from them. I knew I didn't want to go and be like any one of them. I wanted to be like me. And I also really spent a lot of time reading about great coaches. We didn't have podcasts and all that stuff back then. And so you had to read books or listen to audio tapes, cassette tapes. And so I remember I was out recruiting my first year there at YSU, and I was listening to an audio tape, and the speaker on the audio tape I had, it was entitled Championship Coaches, and it had a cassette for each coach. And the one I was listening to was Hayden Fry from the University of Iowa. And Hayden Fry had taken over an Iowa program that was struggling and had really good success. And he was talking a little bit about how they went about that. And so I was very interested, in learning lessons on what he did when he took over as a head coach there. And he said an interesting thing. He said, the first thing we did was we created a course on winning. And I thought, a course on winning. And as I thought through his whole discussion, I thought, I'm going to create a manual that we can use in our course on winning, and not just winning in football, but winning in the classroom and winning in the community and winning later on in life and all those things. And so we started building our own winner's manual, or our own course on winning, however you want to put it. And I think the first one was like 60 pages long, and it was a lot of it was expectations and a lot of organizational things and a lot of policies and a lot of, hey, this is how we're going to approach things. This is the way we're going to travel. This is the way we're going to, do this and that. And then as time went on, players and coaches throughout the course of time would always say, hey, we need to add this to the winner's manual. Put this in. This helped me. Boom, put this in. Coaches, this helped me. So by the time I was done at Ohio State in 2010, our winner's manual was 500 pages. And it was all things that people had said, hey, this can help us win. And so it just became kind of our blueprint. And I wanted our guys to have that. And, you only have so much time with your guys, right? So much practice time, so much meeting time. So I wanted them to have something when they were sitting in the dorm, or they were going through tough times, or whatever it happened to be, is I wanted them to have something to leaf through and to reinforce. And so, I mean, to this day, I still get calls from guys, hey, I lost my winner's manuals, and so I'm flat out of winner's manuals that, that I had left over. But now I've gone to putting winner's manuals on thumb drives, and so I have my last winner's manual on a thumb drive. And when I, hear from a guy, regardless of when they played, and they say, hey, I lost my winner's manuals or whatever, I'm able to send them a thumb drive. But it became the foundation. And I told many coaches along the way, I've got probably 25 examples of winner's manuals that other people have made, and they didn't call it winner's manual. They called it whatever. And I always told them, I said, hey, don't copy our winner's manual. Our guys created this, and this fit us. You figure out your winner's manual, and you create a signature of your own on it. And it's been so much fun to see the ones high schools have sent me and colleges have sent me, and just to see, and at times I would leaf through them and say, hey, man, that's a good idea. And in fact, just last summer, Mark D'Antonio and I were running around going to some preseason camps, and we were at Pitt, and they gave us a copy of the Pitt winner's manual. And I mean, the technology these days and the printing and the fancy, ours was not fancy whatsoever. But just to see the way people's winner's manuals have evolved has been fun. And so many of my guys tell me to this day, they still refer to their winner's manual, or they use it with their own children, or they use it with their business or whatever. And that's the type of longevity and legacy, whatever you want to call it, that's more important than wins and losses, because wins and losses become trivia questions, but things that you can use forever, can add value. And so it's been a fun, been a fun evolution.
Awesome. I think Coach Haycock's was the winner's manual when we came into camp with him. So I have mine somewhere. I'm sure it's similar to yours from your time there. Obviously, Coach Haycock took over for you, and so very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, Coach, if you don't mind, I'm going to follow up with that one, just because I was listening to your podcast all about the team, and AJ Hawk, the Dayton, Ohio son, right? He's the greatest to ever come out of Dayton, Ohio. I love him.
Other than you, right?
Other than me, yes,
Right,
naturally,
right.
right? Yeah. But no, I was very curious during the episode, because you were talking about the fluidity a little bit of the winner's manual, how you took things out, and then you took out the one, I think it was about the glass man, and then Bobby Carpenter came storming into your office and was like, no, you put that thing right back in. So I had never heard the one about the glass man. Unless it's a secret, don't share it. But could you talk about that one? The man in the glass.
The man in the glass. Yeah. It's, again, we had so many guys say, hey, this is good. Add this, and our guys used to read it during preseason. They used to read it just when they were needing to pick me up or whatever. And so we were getting so many pages, and not that we had budget problems at Ohio State, but I didn't want them to be so, it's a lot of printing for 150 guys, and counting coaches and et cetera. So I occasionally would thin it out and say, well, look, I'll pull this out and I'll pull that out, But as we mentioned in the podcast with AJ, Bobby went out of his mind. He said, that's my go-to whenever camp was getting, tough, or things weren't going well for me, or I wasn't happy about something, which with Bobby was often. He said, I always went to the man in the glass and you took it out, and so we printed it and got it put back in. And I promise you, it's still in, the final version. But, I thought, Kurt, when AJ was talking a little bit about it, he was very um, transparent about the fact that, when he first started, using the winner's man, I was like, what is this? I came here to play football, et cetera. And like anything else, if you give it a chance, it can make a difference for you. And I had never heard that from him, that he used to just kind of blow it off as we would go through it, until he was maybe in his second or third year. And he's like, you know what? This is pretty good. And it was fun to hear him talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. Somebody, especially like AJ. So shifting gears a little bit from my question, just talk a little bit. I'm all of us here on the podcast and everybody that listens to us is just, number one, we are college football fans. If you could just talk about what recruiting was like earlier in your stage and at Youngstown State, and then, how it evolved while you were at Ohio State. And if you want to touch on the NIL and the current landscape, but mostly just how recruiting as a coach has evolved over the years.
Well, I think there's two things that are very true. One is that the only thing constant is change. And so recruiting changed dramatically throughout the course of time and will continue to change. It always has nuances that, it's never going to stay the same. The other thing that I always believed, and I talked a lot about in my interview with Youngstown State, is, you have to have as much strategy in your recruiting as you do in your X's and O's. And you have to have a plan and you have to follow certain things. And so when we came to Youngstown State in '86, I knew we didn't have much money to go recruiting. And I also knew how proud the area was of their high school players, and the football was good. And so we started off with what we called our recruiting plan was the state of Youngstown. And we drew about an hour radius around Youngstown. We said, hey, look, we're going to commit ourselves to get 75% of our players from within an hour, because we want their families involved. We want their teammates, involved. We want to become this region's team. And so we set out to try to do that. But we also said we need to have quality players at every position, and 25% of our players, we're going to go wherever we had to recruit them. And back then in the mid 80s, late 80s, there was no UCF and USF and FIU and Florida Atlantic. And so our number two area became Florida. And we knew we didn't have the money to recruit the whole state of Florida. So we just decided we're going to recruit Dade and Broward County. And there were thousands of athletes there, and there was no mid-level program around. And so those people were, if they didn't get recruited by Florida, Florida State, Miami, they were going somewhere on an airplane. I mean, they just were. And so Coach Narduzzi had started recruiting Florida a little bit in his last maybe 2 or 3 years. And so we had some Florida guys on our roster that were really good. And Coach Narduzzi's philosophy was, we're going to go late in recruiting, and we're going to find out the kids who haven't been offered and find out who's the best ones. And so that's kind of what he did. And he left us some guys like Lorenzo Davis and Rod Love and Rod Henderson and Devin Hall. And I mean, we had some guys. And so we built on that. We built on the success that Coach Narduzzi's staff had begun. And there was a guy named Ace Conjemi, who was a Youngstown guy coaching in Broward County. And so he's the one that kind of opened the door to Coach Narduzzi and got that thing flowing. So really our recruiting was 75% state of Youngstown, 25% wherever you got to go, with a heavy emphasis on Florida. We did a little bit of junior college recruiting. We were fortunate to have some really good players transfer in. That was, though, at the time when you had the city year. And so we had guys like Jerry Dunlap, who had played at South Carolina, on our scout team for a year, Sam Wesley from South Carolina, Paul Soltis from Ohio State, Chris Samarone from Kentucky. I mean, we had some guys, but what was good was they had to come and become a part of the family and uh, kind of earn their place in the locker room. And so that changed in about 1994 when the rule was changed that if you were transferring down a division, you were immediately eligible. And quite honestly, that made it harder because you found some guys that were a little bit sour on where they were. They were blaming it on where they were. They didn't. They felt like they could just come right in and play right away because they were transferring down. And we probably had a worse batting average on transfers once it was immediate eligibility. Well, now, fast forward, it's immediate. There's guys. I think we had one player from YSU that transferred 2 times since he left us last January.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
so, the only thing constant is change. You better have a philosophy. You better get to know the quality of the programs you're recruiting from, um, and you better get the right kind of people that will fall in love with Youngstown State or wherever it is you're coaching. Um, we had guys, that we had the Florida houses, up there on the north side where, the guys could move out of the dorm after their sophomore year or something. And so they got in those terrible houses up there on the north side, and there'd be like 8 Florida guys. They called it the Florida house, but it created a little camaraderie. And ironically, I felt one of our advantages at Youngstown State was we didn't have much to do. I mean, we didn't have 25 bars on campus, and we didn't have a big social atmosphere, and all we had was each other. Now, our guys had plenty of fun, but they had it with each other, and it was different than some places that the players would scatter out and be all over different establishments and whatnot. Our guys were always together, and uh, that was part of our strategy. Is we wanted to bring in people who wanted to spend time with one another. If they didn't think that our environment had enough social life to it, then that probably wasn't the person we needed anyway, because our guys, they had plenty of social life, but it was just with each other, and and so that became, you know, something that we needed to figure out as we were recruiting, and we always said that you never know who's going to become a great player. You're kidding yourself if you think you know. And some guys that you thought were just okay became all conference, and other guys that you thought were going to be superstars, never really got as good as you thought. Um, but the thing that you had to make sure you minimized were the guys that were a bust, because as long as they ended up being contributors and you had the highest percent chance of putting the most number of good players together, not just for the game, but for practice. You needed great competition in practice. And we just really talked a lot about minimizing our mistakes and uh, mistakes, not getting the right kind of person, not getting the right kind of team player, not getting a guy who was good enough. Um, and so we used to always say, recruiting is like shaving. If you miss a day, you look like a bum. And so every day, no offense there, Kyle, but but every day we worked on recruiting. And now let's fast forward to today. All of those things are true. It's a little bit harder today, with the mobility. Your rosters are changing so dramatically. And if you think that building a team culture and building camaraderie and all that was important all along, which we really believed it was. It's even more important today because you have to do it more quickly, and it's there's more distractions. I tease some of my guys from the 90s all the time. I said, it's a good thing they didn't have the portal or I'd have lost you guys fast, and I said, you'd have left me in a heartbeat, but today the rules of engagement are the rules of engagement. Whether you like the NIL or you don't, you better be better than your opponents in the NIL. If you don't like the portal, whatever, if you utilize the portal at all, you better be better at that than your opponents. You better make the right choices of who not just go hog wild, and you need to vet your players. And then the other thing is, you probably need to do a better job of recruiting your own players because they do have a little more freedom to say, you know what, I'm not loving it here. So we always wanted our players to have a great experience and fall in love with Youngstown State and fall in love with their teammates and all that. Even more important today.
Coach, question. I mean, obviously, everyone that follows the podcast knows that you created a dynasty in the 90s of Youngstown State. Just to really kind of kick it off or the start of that dynasty, what game or games or certain players of yours kicked off that dynasty run? What win or accomplishment stuck out that really got the train going?
Well, when we got there, we were in the Ohio Valley Conference, and Eastern Kentucky had been one of the kingpins in our level of football. They had just moved up from Division II, just like all of us had in the early 80s. And they had won Division II national championships, and they were always in the hunt for the 1AA championship. And they were in our conference. And Middle Tennessee had creeped up to being just as good as they were. So the first thing that we talked about was the first thing you have to do is you have to get as good as the guys that you play every year. And so we set our sights on, we want to look like those guys and we want to play better than them. And that was always, they were always a little bit of our target. Well, as fate would have it, after our first year there, which was not a great year, we were 2-9. Fortunately, we had a breakthrough game in that year, and that the last game of the year we were 1-9, and Akron was 8-2 or something like that, heading to the playoffs, and we beat them. And that was a huge breakthrough game because it was our rival. They were a playoff team. We got a little bit of belief in ourselves, and we had a couple kids who were sitting out that their transfer thing that we knew we were going to get better pretty quick, and we had a lot of guys returning, and I can't thank that senior class enough. We had maybe 12 or 14 guys that their last year was 2-9. They had to live through a coaching change, and those are never fun. And then the result of the coaching change was worse than they'd been, but they hung in there, man. They, those guys stayed strong and believed in the program. And every time I see one of those guys, I say, hey, look, I know you didn't get to enjoy some of the things that the people after you did. You were so critical in building that. And that group of guys, they were amazing. In fact, I don't know if you know, but this past January, Coach Knatzer had arranged to buy those guys, those 12 seniors, rings. They had never had a ring. He just bought them a Youngstown State ring. It didn't say anything about championships because they didn't win the championship. But he and I and the rest of the staff wanted them to know that, you know what, they were every bit a part of this program as anyone else. And so that was a major breakthrough. And then after that 86 season, the University of Akron left the Ohio Valley Conference. And we were asked to leave the next year. They said, you can play one more year, but then you have to leave. And we're like, oh my gosh, where are we going? Akron was going to the Mid-American. we had no home. And so our next breakthrough, I guess, would be the fact that in that last year, we had committed ourselves that we're going to win the Ohio Valley Conference, and we were going to move up there and be like Eastern Kentucky and Middle Tennessee and so forth. And as it turned out, we lost to Eastern Kentucky that year, but we beat Middle Tennessee. And I think Eastern and Middle each lost or something. I can't remember exactly what happened, but we were the OVC champions. And so that was a huge breakthrough. Had a playoff game. We got to feel that. We got beat by Northern Iowa. And that was, I can't remember how many teams they let in back then, but it might have been 16. It was either 8 or 16. But anyway, we got in the playoffs. And we didn't win the game. We lost at the midnight hour. They called a touchdown catch, an incompletion, and we lost the game. And, I think it was an incompletion, but all of our fans think it was a catch, but that's what fans are for. And then we had to enter the ranks of being independent and no conference. And that was hard. And we didn't have that target of those guys in the Ohio Valley because we didn't get to play Eastern Kentucky and we didn't get to play Middle Tennessee. And we had to go out, scramble out and get a bunch of games. And we probably had 3 or 4 teams from the MAC that we scrambled a game from. And we ended up not having a good year. We lost a great quarterback, Trenton Likes. We called him the General. I mean, he was ROTC student, ended up having a great military career. And we just never solidified that position as well as we could have that year. But we got on our feet in terms of understanding when you're an independent, it's a different world. You don't have some of the things to shoot for, all conference teams and natural rivalries. And so we decided going into the spring of '89 that we'd go visit Florida State because at the time Florida State was independent and they were killing it. And they were, and so we wanted to see what's the idiosyncrasies of being an independent. How do you approach that? And so I spent an entire week with the Florida State staff, football-wise, academically, motivational view of how to be an independent, strength program. I mean, I covered everything head to toe, and I knew we were getting better. And we had a quarterback coming along who we let play the last 2 or 3 games of 1988, Ray Isaac. And really starting in '89, we were pretty good. We were independent, but we got in the playoffs and we beat Eastern Kentucky in the first round. And Eastern Kentucky had 28 straight home wins going. And we went down there and beat them, which was a huge step. The next week, we were playing the defending national champions, Furman, and we were down at Furman, and we were ahead 16-3 and had a punt blocked and ended up losing the game. But you could see we were starting to get a feel for it. And so that Eastern Kentucky game, I would say, was one of those breakthroughs. But maybe the biggest breakthrough we had was a game we lost, and that was in 1990. We were 11-0, and we thought we had figured it out. And Central Florida had moved from Division II to 1AA. They were starting to build their program, and it was a sunny day, 70 degrees, and Thanksgiving weekend, and we were counting on the ice castle to give us an advantage, and it was 72 degrees or something. And we lost on the last play of the game. They kicked a field goal. But that loss was the biggest breakthrough we had, because our guys were not going to let that happen again. And we went to 4 straight national championships and won 3 of them. But I think those were the breakthrough games. And then after you get to a certain point, now it's a different challenge. Now you're circled on everyone's. And so, it makes it a little bit more difficult. But I think those were some of the early breakthroughs that we had.
Nice. DK, over to you.
Yeah, Coach, kind of a perfect lead into my question that I thought I'd want you to share with our listeners and the guys here today. I've heard you talk about it before, and as you were climbing the mountain and the disappointment in '90, and I remember being at that game with my dad and my brothers. We were up in the seats there. And you're right. I think we got sunburned there that November day, and it was, you were 11-0, devastating. And then the next year you go and, you climb the mountain, and the whole mantra of RYFP, and, it set the town on fire. I mean, and so you had told a story after that 91 title game, and would love to have you share it, where when you flew back into Youngstown and airport was crazy, a gentleman approached you, and I'll let you share the story about that moment in time after winning the 91 title. And I think it talks about what you've mentioned about what the program at that moment, that you and some of your coaches and the teammates realized about, it was more than just football. If you could share that story about that gentleman.
Yeah, it's interesting. The lesson we learned after 90 was that it's bigger than us. I think we were thinking about what rings were we going to get, and all the stuff that was going to come our way. And when we went into the 91 season, we talked at length about, as you mentioned, RYFP, which meant reach your full potential, because we all knew we didn't the year before. I mean, I don't know if we were going to be national champions, but we didn't need to be losing in the first round of the playoffs. And so we talked a lot about that, but we really talked a lot about the fact that we'll never reach our potential until we understand that it's bigger than what it brings to us personally. And that it's got to be, we've got to think about what it brings to the school and what it brings to the community. And that we had to put our personal desires aside and think about the collective impact we could make. And so that was the conversation throughout that entire year. And it didn't start off great. We were 4-3. And, we went down to Georgia Southern, and they had won 4 of the last 6 national championships or something crazy. And they were 55-2 on their home turf after building their new stadium. And they were the big dog. And, we're 4-3. We knew we don't win that one, it's no postseason. And in fact, we knew we had to win out just to get in. And again, we're independent. So we didn't have an automatic bid. We didn't have, no way to do that. And so I think our guys grew to understand that what we were seeking was something that could make a giant impact. And so, as history tells you, we went and we won, 8 straight games, and we're national champions. And we were down 17-3 at the half against Marshall, and came back and won the game. And just so happened that it was at Georgia Southern. They were the host. And so we won probably our 2 biggest games of the year on the same field, and it wasn't ours. And but what I guess reinforced to me of our thinking that this has got to be bigger than just what it does for us was when we got back to the Youngstown airport. I mean, there were 10,000 people there. I mean, I've been a lot of big games and all that kind of thing. To this day, I never saw anything like what was at the airport. I mean, there weren't 10,000 people after we beat Miami in 2002 for the national championship. This was unusual. And it took us quite a while to get through the airport. I mean, it was the entire length of Belmont Avenue from campus all the way to the airport was wall-to-wall cars beeping, and every store sign had something up about the champions and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, so we finally got through the airport and we got into the bus. And, just like anything, the coach is counting noses, everybody here. Yeah, okay. We're ready to get back to campus. And I was just getting ready to step onto the bus, and someone tugged at my coat. And it was a cold December day. It was snowing in Youngstown. And I had a big top coat on, and someone was tugging at my coat. And I looked back, and it was an older gentleman just crying like a baby. I mean, he was just crying. And I thought, wow, this is bigger than, but then what he said to me was life-changing for me. And he said, Coach, he said, this is the biggest day in my life since VE Day. Now, I'm not a historian, but I knew what VE Day was, the end of the Second World War. And I was just stunned. And I just kind of froze for a second. And then I looked back to talk to him, and he was gone. And I was like, wow, okay, well, look, this is crazy. So I went and sat down on my seat in the bus, and we're riding back Belmont Avenue. And I mean, we were creeping 20 miles an hour, people beeping, and it was madness. And all I could think about was, I wonder who that was. I wonder what their life story is. I thought, I bet you that guy immigrated to this country, and I bet you he probably worked in the steel mill because he looked like he, was a healthy dude. I mean, he was roughed up a little bit. I thought, I wonder if he went and served in that war. And I wonder if when he got back and he was, raising his family and all that kind of thing, I wonder if he was there on Black Monday and lost his job. And all I could think about was that guy. And here we are coming back from national championship game. I wasn't thinking one thing about, and all it kept reinforcing to me was this is way bigger than, the rings we're going to get or the trophy that we were hoisting. And that was that first championship, the impact it had. And then I think that championship at Ohio State, we hadn't had one in 34 years. And it was crazy, the impact that so many people thought, I'm going to die before the Buckeyes ever win it again. I can die now happy. And, all those kinds of comments, those probably were the two, most amazing things to me. Not that any one of the other championships wasn't wonderful too, or any of the other teams that didn't win the championship. You love those teams and you were so proud of them, and you can point to so many things, those teams that they impacted, and they loved one another, and they're still tighter than tight can be. But those two really reminded me that this great game that we play is way bigger than us.
Yeah, thanks. I thought that story the first time I heard you say that to a group of guys, because I remember, growing up here in Youngstown, and after and leading up to winning that titles, then you started seeing, like, my buddies and I, we couldn't wait to get a YSU football T-shirt to wear to high school, and it really took the city to, and the guys on this show know, and our listeners know, but I think it's important to hear that everyone's alluded to the winner's manual, the dynasty that you built, and the success you had, but those moments that the football program really was symbolic of the city. It was the city was the football program, and the football program was the city. It was really a kind of neat correlation and impactful, to say the least. So,
it's funny, when we came in '86, everyone wanted to talk about YSU, Youngstown State football, and we made the conscious decision that we were going to put on our T-shirts and everything else, Youngstown football. We didn't want it to be just the school. And we wanted people to think about Youngstown football. And because we knew, that city had just been through it now, the amazing, tragedy of losing 42,000 jobs and your corporate headquarters and, all those things. We were excited about seeing if we could be helpful. And one thing I noticed when I got there was that the university was going to have to play a major role in bringing back the pride of the area. And it wasn't their fault that the steel jobs left or whatever. It just, but it was a blow, and we needed to do something to bring back their pride. And I think we did, and it continues to, and the university itself. We were just today, Danny and I were out at Avalon talking to some young lady who was bringing us Diet Coke, and she goes to Kent. But all she talked about was how awesome Youngstown State is. And she said, that place is unbelievable. And, it's miraculous. I love how the downtown is merging. And she said, I just love Youngstown. Now, she wanted to be a fashion merchandising major, and Kent has a good program. But you could tell she was a Penguin. Uh, and that the university was a big reason why she loves the area she lives in. And, so, uh, that's to me been one of the fun things about having that opportunity to be at Youngstown State was we could do something that was way bigger than winning games.
Cyril.
All right. Coach, I think you already answered my next question, but if not, just feel free to elaborate. I was thinking about what to ask on the show, and I was thinking about how Kurt and I spent 5 years at YSU, and each team, each roster that we were on is very unique, very different from season to season. And if you had a team that specifically stuck out to you and why and you talked about the 91 team and the 2002 team that won those first national championships. But I was thinking more in lines of it doesn't necessarily have to be a title winning team. It could have been a team that fell short or just specifically why a team sticks out to you.
That's the beauty of coaching, and maybe unlike some professions you can go into, is that every single one of your years has something different and special about it. As I talked about that 2-9 team, had they not hung in there and told the younger people to believe in this plan and that Youngstown State is important, and we couldn't have done without them. We couldn't have done without that 4-7 team in 1988. That it taught us so many lessons. After going to 4 straight national championships, winning 3, we were 3-8 in 95. And that team, the things they went through that, it didn't result in a great winning record, but, we had our All-American captain was murdered on campus, drive-by shooting, and the stuff our people went through. Uh, we wouldn't have been national champions without the 2-9 and the 4-7, and that's why we're all in this together. We wouldn't have accomplished, the things we did in the 90s without the 1990 disappointment and the 95 disappointment, because we had decided going in, we were good in 89. We were really good. So we decided going into 1990 that we're going to be the winningest team in the decade of the 90s. And it's going to take 10 teams. And they might not all win every game, but no one's going to win more games than we are in the 90s. And it's going to be a collective thing. And, not every team won the national championship. A couple teams lost the national championship. And, but they were all contributing to what we were trying to be. And that's the game of football. And that's what worries me a little bit about today's world is everyone, all they want to talk about is winning. And, oh, well, Coach Day is not good enough because, he's 56-6 or something. But we didn't win the championship or whoa. The value of football isn't solely in the wins and losses. We don't apologize for wanting to win. And we're awfully proud of when we did reach our potential. But the times that we went through things together, that's what molded our players to be able to do what they're doing now. And the value that they took from being a part of this family, sure, winning can contribute to that, but that's just a small fraction. Everything that they learned, all the values and the lessons and the selflessness and the work ethic and that ability to have that grit and determination. And only one team wins the championship. Does that mean the other 120 teams didn't add value? Didn't gain from that experience? If so, shoot, we should just have one team a year. And so I think there's no question that I can go down through every one of our teams and tell you there was a lot special about them. And I can also go through a lot of teams where I look back and say, man, if I would have made a couple calls. I mean, that team could have not only learned all the valuable lessons they learned, but they would have won more games. And so I learned a lot of lessons, and so that's why, in my mind, athletics and really any team activity. We have 9 great engineering teams at Youngstown State, and they go and compete all over the country. And what it takes for them to build their race cars and their rockets and their bridges and their chemi cars and all that time together. That's what's going to make them great as they move into the next phase of their life. And they'll win some of the time and they'll not win some of the time. But I don't know what other entity can add value to a person's future better than group activities. It doesn't have to be football. I happen to like football the best because it has more people. It takes 100 guys, and it takes 10 trainers, and it takes 6 equipment guys, and it takes a dozen coaches, and it takes, the whole marching band and, more fans than a normal sport and so forth. It's just larger. And so that's why I think it's the greatest, but it doesn't mean that it's the only sport or group activity that can, make a tremendous difference in someone's life.
Thank you.
So, Coach, I live in Columbus, and everywhere I walk around, everywhere I drive, the red shirts all have the block O on it, and the black shirts have the block O. So when I rep my Y, often it brings me into conversation. But funny enough, I actually work with somebody now who was on 1986 Ohio State roster with you, a lineman named Michael Curie. Not sure if you're familiar with Michael Curie, but we met, and I work in Worthington with him. And one of the first questions he asked me was, who's the best Youngstown State linebacker? And I know personally Tim Johnson, and I thought Tim's going to take off my head if I don't respond and say Tim Johnson. And so Michael looks at me and says, "You're wrong. It's Paul Soltis." And I said, Michael, you got to check the record books. Tim's got 450 tackles in 2 years. And he goes, you go back and look at those record books and see if, Paul Soltis is where he's at. And of course, Paul is probably, I don't know, Coach Kopp, I think you looked, he's probably number 1. So a little bit lighter question for you. I don't know if you got a true definitive answer, but better linebacker, Tim Johnson or Paul Soltis?
I could throw another one in the mix for a different reason. And his name is Kwanzaa Swan. And Kwanzaa Swan was our starting Mike backer and captain of our 99 team coming back. Great player, engineering student, Killian High School in Miami. Just a
Jelani Barasa.
Just a stud, right?
Yeah.
And Tim Johnson shows up at YSU, and we're in preseason. And we look at each other and say, oh, man, this Tim Johnson, you can't have him be a backup. I mean, this guy could play. So I called Kwanzaa Swan in, captain of our team. I said, hey, Kwanzaa, how would you feel about moving to outside backer? I know you've been the starter at Mike for 2 or 3 years. I know you've got hundreds of tackles. I think we can be a better team if we have all you guys on the field. And he was like, they even hesitate.
Wow.
He said, yeah. He said, that Tim Johnson's going to be good. And he said, whatever I have to do for the team. So is it the number of tackles that makes you the best? Is it your willingness to do whatever the team needs? What is it that makes you the best? And so I'm not a big stat guy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different eras and different challenges. You talk about from 2001 forward, it was more difficult to be a Youngstown State Penguin simply because that was their game. Everybody that played, you guys were there in what, like 09 to 13 or something?
09 to 13, yep.
So everybody's game, because, those championships and all that were fresh. They really were. And from 2001 to, all the way until we went back to the championship. And when we went back, there was an around FCS, like, are these guys back? Like, whoa.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a whole set of different challenges. The game changes dramatically. Um, and even coaches change. I used to always tease my coaches, especially in ones that, it's obvious how many yards you gain as a running back because, there's an official stat. The ball started here and it went 4 yards or whatever. Well, sometimes those tackle things, it's like, were you really in on the tackle, or did you jump on the pile or whatever? And so I always take a grain of salt for some of those tackle records for them to say, well, Tim
Right.
Johnson had more than Paul Soldis. Well, maybe Paul Soldis is, time, the statistic makers, you had to be the only one on the tackle, or
Right.
you didn't get
Right.
tackled. So, but you're no way you're going to tempt me to get into making a distinction between Paul Soltis or Tim Johnson or Kawanza Swan or
Yeah.
John Tikak or, you name the guys.
Reggie Lee, Leon Jones. Yeah.
Right. Leon Jones was 3 straight years All-American. I mean,
Yeah. Wow.
Is he not pretty good? And it's different eras.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different world. But the good news is when you have a program like ours that's been good for many decades, you can have nice arguments about maybe who was,
For
the
sure.
best. Like, is it Derek Rivers or is it Harry Delagianis? I mean, I don't
For
know.
sure. Yeah.
Different eras,
Different players. They're completely different players, I'm sure.
and is it Kurt Hess or is it Mark Brungard? I mean, who was the greatest quarterback of all time? Now we know who the greatest equipment manager was, Dan Kopp. I mean, that's clear, but
No, Carmine Cassis.
Carmine, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
Carmine was the man.
Go ahead, Sal.
All right. As you know, Coach, I grew up Tampa, Florida. Growing up here, as you mentioned, everyone was either Florida, Florida State, Miami. That 2002 Miami Hurricane team was still today considered the greatest team to not win a championship. My question to you, because I still remember going into that game when I was in grade school watching this game. No one gave you a chance. I mean, they thought you were just getting blown out of the water. Were the 02 Hurricanes, would you call them overrated, or was that the best team you've ever seen? What were your thoughts going into that game? Did you know you were going to beat that team?
Oh, no, we didn't know that. We knew for sure how good they were, and they were not overrated. I mean, they had won 34 straight games. The championship game the year before was like 59-10 or something. They had all those great players. Between the two rosters, Ohio State's roster, team picture, and Miami's, if you put those together, those 200 guys, 87 of them ended up in the NFL. I mean, madness. I mean, those two teams were incredible. And so, no, they were not overrated. I think we had an advantage. We had slowly gotten better as the year went. Had 7 games that were a touchdown or less that we won. They had mostly blowouts. I'm not sure they had been tested quite as tough as we had from a schedule standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone knew how good they were, including us. We knew how good they were. I don't know for sure if they could understand how good we were because, you watch some of those games and you say, oh my gosh, they barely beat Cincinnati or they barely beat Purdue or, whatever, which is true. We were growing. And I knew going into the game that if we played extremely well, we could play with them. Did I know we could beat them? No. But then when the first series happened and I could see the shock on their face as to how good our defense was, they had just, kind of had their way. They could run, they could pass, they had great receivers, Andre Johnson, Kellen Winslow, Willis McGahee, Ken Dorsey. I mean, and, offensive linemen all going to the NFL, and their defense was crazy good. They probably had 7 or 8 first-round picks on their defense. But I could see the shock on the faces of their offense. They had never seen anything like our defense. And Now it was a matter of could we cobble together a little bit against their crazy defense, because they were good. And people might lose money in a bet if you said, well, who was the leading rusher in that game? Was it Maurice? Was it Willis McGahee? Who was it? Well, it was Craig Krenzel. He rushed for 83 yards and hard-earned yards. And Maurice didn't have that many. Willis didn't have that many. It was two extraordinary defenses, and so we knew we could hang in there, I think, once the game started. But we also knew that we better not make many mistakes, because they could blow you out fast. And so it was one of the most vicious, hard-hitting, physical. I couldn't even imagine if there were playoffs and we would have had to play the next week. I'm not sure after that one we would have been ready. I mean, it was, but they were not overrated. They were a good football team.
Nice. We still have a few things to get through. Instagram questions, YouTube questions, and we just want to get into your post coaching life quickly to the when you were university president and whatnot. Cheryl, Kurt, I know we don't have much time, but pass it to you guys. Instagram, YouTube live questions, anything worth noting, any shout outs or anything to ask Coach?
I'll take it first, Kurt. There's just one really quick one, Coach, here. For a youngster just starting into sports, any team environment, what advice would you give a young kid that's pursuing athletics or a team environment?
I think it's critical for the kid and as much for the parents to see what the desired outcomes are of spending that time with it. I mean, if it's if they're going into it thinking that I just need to win a trophy, or I just I'm gonna get a scholarship or whatever, clarifying that thinking that those things are fine, and if their outcomes, great, but for them to go in with their eyes wide open as to, hey, here's why you're going to do this, and here's what you're going to be up against, and here's the difficult things that you're going to have to handle. And so if you're going to go do it, understand that you're going to do it. You're going to commit yourself to it, and it's not going to be easy. And we're not going to worry about what you get from it in terms of tangibles. We're going to concern ourselves with what you get from it from a comprehensive standpoint. And that's hard, because youth sports have changed a great deal. Again, it's a different era, right? And if you're a parent and your kid's bugging you like crazy, they want to go do this or that. And if you don't seem to think that the desired outcomes you have for their spending time there is in line with what you'd like, sometimes the parents got to be the bigger person and say, hey, look, we're not going to get involved in this, or yes, we are, but here's the ground rules. And I think making sure they know why we're doing this, and why are we not, why not are we doing this? That what are we looking for out of this experience?
Awesome. And I got one late one that came in, typical Torian Pace fashion. Gentlemen. T-Man chimed in late. I thought it was a great segment question from coaching to your post-coaching career. What strategies and concepts did you carry over from being a head coach at the level you were to ultimately becoming the president at YSU?
Well, you have to learn the game. And so I was fortunate that I learned the game of being an administrator, spending 2 years as a vice president at Youngstown State. So I kind of went to boot camp there and learned the kind of the different world than the one I had spent, almost 4 decades in. But then you take the same fundamental things that helped you be successful and helped you progress in your, former life, and apply them, apply the fact that, hey, this is going to be a selfless bunch. This is going to be a hardworking bunch. This is going to be a bunch that's going to, set high standards, have high expectations. We're going to be great listeners. We're going to be great communicators. All the things, you could list 50 of them that make a successful football program. Well, those same things can make a successful university. It's harder, it's bigger. There's a wider variety of interests and goals and so forth. Um, but probably the number one that I would tell Torian is that uh, I don't care what it is you're trying to do, especially from a leadership standpoint, is you have to be a great listener that becomes aware of what is important to your people, and you have to make sure that you can help them realize their goals, because that's what we did as coaches. We had you guys set goals. What is it that you wanted to gain from this? We didn't allow it to be simply I want a ring or I want to get drafted, but what else? And then our goal was to try to help you realize those dreams. So uh, the same was true in trying to lead a university. And the other thing that, again, I've mentioned to Danny many times, timing is important. When I came as the president at Youngstown State, I was the fourth president in 5 years, and they were looking for some stability. They were looking for someone who loved Youngstown State, who loved the Valley, who they could count on to at least try hard. Might not be any good, but at least try hard. And I think that's important, regardless of what venue you're trying to make a difference.
Awesome. Thank you, Coach.
Coach, I got one here from social media. Both YSU and OSU days, through the highs and lows, kind of what record wise each year. How were you able to kind of receive support from your wife and your family? In what ways were you as a coach and somebody under a lot of scrutiny, both at YSU and OSU? How were you kind of able to lean in on your family during those times?
Well, you knew for sure that it was probably harder on them than it was on you. When you're involved in the fray, I mean, I didn't have time to read social media. I didn't have time to listen to talk radio. I didn't have, but yet your family is out there and your kids are in school or whatever. And uh, I was blessed, that, I remember my youngest daughter bringing me a little stuffed penguin after we were 3-8, and we'd been to 4 straight national championships. And I mean, they were killing us. They were, oh, the dynasty's over and these guys weren't any good to start with, and, whatever. And she brought a stuffed penguin in and said, hey, you'll always be my penguin. And, those kinds of things, when you go home, A, it's harder on them, and B, they're with you. And, you know, it better be that way, because uh, they're the ones really in the fray more than you are, believe it or not. And you do try to tell them, don't read all that stuff, but it's too tempting sometimes,
Yeah.
because what happens is when you're winning big, you kind of like listening to all that, right? When you're a family member, wife, family, kids, whatever. Well, so now all of a sudden you're in the habit of listening because most of the comments are good.
Mm-hmm.
Then when it turns on a dime, you're probably caught listening again. And so, you had to know that it was so tough on them. And plus, I think, you can't bring your job home. When you go home, I don't care what you do. You leave the job there, and you can't be all salty. One of the biggest mistakes I made as an early head coach was I always coached the quarterbacks. And if my quarterback had a bad day, I kind of took it out on the team, because I was, you know, um, and I didn't even know I was doing it. But I was so surly about what my quarterback was doing that it just kind of flowed out, unknowingly. And so I had to work on that, and I think you have to work on that with your home front as well. Is, if when you're disappointed with things or whatever, the minute you take it home and let that go out there, you're being totally unfair, um, to the folks at home. And one thing, the people that care about you, they don't really care if you win or not. Now, they'd rather win. They like the spoils of winning, but they really don't. Deep down, they just care that you love them. And,
Yeah.
you're blessed when you have that kind of support.
Yeah. That's great advice. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Coach, I can tell you've been doing this a long time in interviews like this, because when you get asked questions, you already know the answer. It's like you've already thought about all this. But quick
You guys have asked me questions I've never had before.
quick transition. We're going to transition, as many of you Penguins know, and has been said on the show. Coach then became president. I call him President Trussell because I knew and met him as my president. And I know we're a little bit over time, but we do have a few questions. I'm going to flip it over to Cheryl first about your time as president of Youngstown State.
Me or Cop?
There you go ahead, Cheryl.
Oh, okay. All right. Coach,
Kyle didn't even go to class.
No. I was always in the first three rows. That was team rule. First three rows. I was at the 2024 ring banquet, and you and your wife Ellen were honored as Penguins of the Year. And I just wanted you to kind of talk about what that means to you after all, like, the countless years of work for the university and the community itself.
Well, I think going back to Kurt's question, to me, the greatest thing about it was finally one of those banquets where they were recognizing more than just my team's record. They were recognizing that, my wife was a Penguin through and through, and she had to sacrifice a great deal for us to have the time and effort. And, she didn't have to say yes for us to come back and be the president, and it's like, oh man, we've just been through this grinder at Ohio State and had a wonderful career and did fine and all that stuff. And now we're going to jump into something we've never done and live in the middle of campus and be in the fishbowl. And so to me, what that 2024 Penguins of the Year did was finally it gave me a chance in public to just watch as she was recognized, and also I think a little bit of a culmination that we had two great stops there. One was 15 years, one was 8.7. Not that I was counting my years as president, but and that's a long time in a lot of time and effort, and so it was I guess it was our evening to thank that group that had supported us. I mean, heck, when the ring banquet started, it was because we couldn't afford to buy rings. I mean, that's and they came to the rescue. And then they not only had that banquet when we won, they had that banquet when we didn't. And because they recognized that every team, is part of the great history and brings the great pride. And our fans, they live and die with our wins and losses, and they feel as strongly about us on the days where we don't win, and the teams that maybe didn't reach their potential. They always wanted us to know they were with us, and to be at that 2024 banquet, just to kind of be reminded of what amazing support we had, and then for Ellen to be able to be recognized, and that was, again, I was at a lot of ring banquets in my time, but that one, I think tied it all together.
Thank you,
Coach. I'm going way back. I remember down at Youngstown Day at Sarasota, you spoke and you told us, hey, applying for a grant, trying to put, I think it was some sort of streetcar transportation in the city of Youngstown. And really, it got me really head spinning. And I know money is an object, but let's pretend it for a second. Money wasn't an object. You didn't need a grant. What type of projects or moves would you have done for Youngstown, either Youngstown State, Youngstown as a city, if you were still president today with a blank check?
Oh boy, man. I think it starts with your faculty, and they're the ones touching all the students all the time, and I always wish I would have had a little bit more in the checkbook to compensate our faculty, because I mean, they were the ones that were going to make a difference, and the same would be true with our coaches. I mean, they were the ones pouring their heart and soul, and so I think if I could have had a blank check, it would have been utilized more, um, you know, to uh, to help those people that make the difference, because the roads and the buildings and all that, that's fine, uh, but it's nothing like the human touch. And I must say, no one has ever asked me that question, because they knew we never had a blank check in Youngstown State. But now, having been asked it, I think, you know you you really uh, would love to, to reward the people that were putting their heart and soul, into those kids, and that to that community.
I was hoping you were going to say you would put a dome over the football stadium with some heaters for the Floridians, but I'll take that
See,
too.
the ice castle was our advantage. Now, come on.
Yeah, not for me. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. See, Coach Sal's from Tampa. He wants a dome. I mean, that's just. I mean, come on. That would just ruin the whole thing. But
Hey, well, Ellen and I are from Florida 4 months out of the year.
that's true. That's true.
180 days, right? If I know my tax laws.
Well, no, we're not Florida residents.
Really?
No. My father-in-law, Frank Watson, who has had quite a bit of a claim at Youngstown State, he used to always tell me, he used to always say, "Hey, I made my money in Ohio. My money's staying in Ohio."
Wow,
There we
that's
go.
loyalty.
Yep. There we go. There we go. Well, that's a good segue into, this transition from coach to president, and always a coach and always a president both ways. But my question before I do that, I think, Sal was talking about a blank check, and, the privilege of working under your guidance for that 6.5 years there. It's back at YSU, that I'm not sure people realize that really. Call it the way it is. During that time, we had to go out and fundraise and meet the alumni and the engagement, and no one was writing checks because of Danny Kopp. I can assure you that. It was time after time, the people we met with, $1 million gifts, $100,000 gifts, whatever it might be. We're doing this because of Jim and Ellen Trussell, and that's a fact. He'll be humble and say, "Oh, they loved YSU," and they do, but it was your plan, your vision for the university, and that you doubled the endowment in 6.5 years, you and Ellen. And I think you guys need to, and our listeners need to think about that. An endowment of 140 million is now, I think it's probably every bit of 300 million or more, because of what you and Ellen did in less than, I know it was 8.7, but the bulk of that was raised in under 7 years. And I don't know if people really sometimes comprehend what you and Ellen did for Youngstown State University to kind of secure it going forward. And that's just incredible. I know we know that on the show here, and a lot of people do, but it's kind of part of the question I wanted to ask, but it's important to understand your transition from coaching to coming back here, which you didn't have to do. And you and Ellen gave all that up to transform the university on a whole different level, from the programs, the honors college that you quadrupled in size, to the Watts and the Excellence Training Center and all the things that you guys did. It kind of made me think about the campus when you came here in '86, and then when you became the president in 2014. Was part of that vision of Wick Avenue, Fifth Avenue, and the entire campus, was that something maybe you thought about, like you alluded to the Leiden House, that, man, when I was here in '86, if we would have had these things on campus, was that kind of when you thought about that? Did any of that come back to you in 2014 and on? Like, wow, if we'd have had this in '86, might have made even more of a difference?
Well, when we got back in 2014, I had a group called my Presidential Mentors, and there were about 25 students, that all ages, freshmen, sophomores, all ethnicities, all academic colleges they were in. And so I asked them, I said, "Hey guys, I'm new at this president thing. I mean, I've been a vice president for 2 years, but and I know I'm going to get 9 million ideas from the staff and the faculty and the board of trustees as to what we should do. I want to hear from you. And I said, tell me, if you were me, what would you do first? And I was shocked. They said, fix the streets. I said, fix the streets. They said, you got to be proud of bringing your friends onto your campus. And you got to be proud every time we had a lot of commuter students, every time you drive up on campus and every time you're showing someone around, you got to be, and we got wires hanging down from telephone poles and we got potholes and, Wick Avenue's like a racetrack with 4 lanes and Fifth Avenue's got 6 lanes and it's like a racetrack. Heck, you can't even cross the street without getting, they said, you got to fix the streets. I said, fix the streets. I didn't know what you were going to say, but so that's when we immediately went to work to fix Wick Avenue because that was the entry to our campus. And it was amazing how the behavior of the drivers changed when all of a sudden you had a beautiful road to drive on. And that's when we went to work on fixing Lincoln and then fixing Fifth Avenue. And you look at, I just drove down Fifth Avenue today and, in another 5 to 7 years, those trees are going to grow up and that thoroughfare is going to be so different than when all of you guys were on campus it was that big wide street that, was half potholes. And so really, I can't take credit for that. Those people said, this is what we got to do. Well, we didn't have any money. So I'll give credit to the state of Ohio, the federal government. We went after grants, all those different things. First Energy was helpful with burying some of the poles so we didn't have wires hanging down. So that was the first thing that they wanted done. And that was not from fundraising money. That was from money that we were able to go out and find a way to get some help. But kind of going back to your thing about all the fundraising and that, I always tell you that timing is important. We were coming in, they just had 4 presidents in 5 years. The community was looking for something good to happen. And what Ellen and I were able to do, and Paul McFadden and Dan Kopp and Brian Nord and, all the people that went out, is we were able to go out and tell the story and kind of get them thinking. And inevitably, so many of the people we talked to, we got them to talk about their experience at YSU. And it was always, hey, Professor so-and-so or Coach so-and-so or my teammates or classmates or whatever. And we were fortunate, not just YSU grads, but some people in the community that knew that Youngstown State was so critical. And we were out there telling the story as to, well, this is probably a good time. And, so like any campaign, we had different buckets that we were trying to raise money for. The one that was easy as heck was so many people, when they came to school here, they got some sort of help, whether it was a little bit of scholarship or financial aid, or they got a loan or they got something. And so they wanted our students now and well into the future, the rest of the history of the school, to have help because they were given help, and we did a lot of conversation about having great faculty. And, we only had 3 endowed chairs for outstanding faculty work. And we got to 21 or 22, because, people could realize, hey, I want to do something that could help those faculty. And then of course, facilities are easy because everyone wants to be proud of the way it looks. And then the public-private partnerships that probably $100 million worth that doesn't show up in the endowment or whatever, is where these public-private partnerships came in and said, we'll build you these apartments if you'll let us sublease your land. So we had no risk, no cost, no nothing, but we wanted nice places for our students to live. And I really think it helped on the honors college side of things, because we said we wanted to triple the size of our honors college. And as you said, we've quadrupled it because, those kids had a lot of opportunities. When you got a 29 ACT and a 3.9 and other schools are giving you, but hey, we can look at these places where you can live. And so, it was just, we wanted to get better in every phase, kind of like in coaching. I used to love it, whether it's preseason now or it was spring practice, the media. I'm going to pretend you guys are the media. You say, okay, well, what's the number one thing you're working on in preseason? Well, everything. What do you mean, what are we working on? We're going to work on the guy holding for field goals. We're going to work on the defense, the offense, the special teams, the trainers, the strength coaches. We want to get better at everything. And I think the timing was good for us to come in and say to the people that had means, hey, we want to get good at everything. We want better professors. We want better scholarships. We want better facilities. We want better opportunities. And so, it was a good time for that because we hadn't had a comprehensive campaign for maybe, I don't know, 8 or 10 years.
That's kind of the point exactly. I appreciate your humility on this, but we always used to say it when we were fundraising that when you have secretariat, which kind of comparing you and Ellen to the greatness of that, you don't fall off the horse. Stay on the horse and call it the way it was. There were campaigns before Jim and Ellen Tressel showed up, and those campaigns maybe raised 40 million, 150 million. Yeah. We're not going to let you off the hook. We're not like the media. We call it the way it is here. The Godfather came in and the university. There were those needs before, but you and Ellen, I was part of that, thankfully, from a distance sense of watching you transform it, the two of you, and the engagement with the alumni. And we were having events and things that never could happen until you and Ellen came in.
Since you're going to call it the way it is, so you other three guys, here's the truth. I would get calls from these donors, and they'd say, "Would you please tell COP to quit calling me? I'll give you some money. If you tell COP to stop calling, I'll get. How much do you want? I'll whatever.
Yeah.
If you'll just promise me, COP will stop calling me."
No, I wish that were Casey. He's still it's a deferral, and I'm not letting it go. We got to get to other questions, but it's the way it was. The good thing for me, I used to be able to kind of tag a cigar into some of these meetings, and it worked because I got to go down to Florida and have a cigar with you. And but when you got secretariat, you just don't. You stay on the horse to win the race. So enough for me. Who's next? Go ahead.
One comment about the streets, because that was so on point. I remember in 2007, I was in high school. My parents, we came to visit, and we didn't even know we were on campus. And when I went back just recently in February, from the light poles, just the spirit on the street, you'd be blocks and blocks away from campus, and you are pulling on the campus. It's completely different now. It's so much better.
What's wrong with you coming back to campus in February and you live in Florida?
It was for my buddy Curdy, Hall of Fame.
Okay. Oh, okay. I was going to say you had to have a heck of an excuse to come back from Tampa, Florida to Youngstown in February.
Kurt was getting inducted. We had to go. My last question is, and the reason I'm asking this in the president section is, from what I understand, the president ultimately makes a decision on flipping conferences. And also, I know if there was ever an opportunity, Ron Stroller would definitely give you a call anyway. With conference realignment, I don't have to relive it. Everyone knows what's happening. The Power Four, or really the Power Two, is really peeling away from the Group of Five, financially speaking. And the Group of Five is coming a lot more like the FCS. Where do you see, both at large, where do you see the FCS and Group of Five landing at the end of the day? And if Youngstown State conference realignment, where do you see us? What do you think we should do? If Ron Stroller makes that call and says, "Hey, what are your thoughts?" What do you think you would tell him?
I've thought for decades that we needed to get the delineation between truly what levels there are, and especially from a resources standpoint. And I've always been a fan of the big boys. Go off and play your game, and then let's really find out what the next levels look like. And that way, all of us who just are fighting for our lives, not that the big boys aren't fighting for their lives, but they have a lot more of the TV side of things that can, but believe me when I tell you, even the Big Two, even the Big Ten and the SEC, maybe more the Big Ten because of the number of sports they have, they're not out of the woods right now to figure out who the heck they are. But I think the question will be, can we get a little bit more regional in our conferences? You know, I love the fact that we have the best football conference in the nation, with the Missouri Valley, but I don't love the fact that it's hard to create those rivalries when you're 1,500, 2,000 miles away. And so I'm hoping that the big boys figure out who they are, go get their deal put together, and then now let's figure out what happens to the rest of us. And it's not just going to impact the group of five or the FCS. It's gonna trickle all the way down. I'm on the board of trustees at Baldwin Wallace, and we just had John Carroll leave our conference, and this team, that team. I think there's going to be some changes here in the next 5+ years. And my wish for all of us is to be in the optimal place. Now, what do I think the optimal place would be for Youngstown State? Is to play a lot more of the regional people that are in the mid-major. I call us mid-major. Uh, to me, that would be optimal, because you could build a lot more rivalries. I mean, the fact that we don't play Akron and Kent in football is crazy.
Right.
Back when we were there, we played Akron and Kent all the time, and it was awesome. We'd have 8,000, 10,000 people go to Kent for a game. Whenever they shot a picture of their stadium for their press guide, it was from our game, and it was as much red as it was blue. So I'm hoping, that when the dust settles, that we've um, come to something that will be good for everyone. Um, and I'm a believer in regionality. And now you get into the playoffs in whatever division you're in. Okay, that's when regionality changes. Now you're playing people outside the region. Uh, I'm not so sure the big boys shouldn't do that. Just that's what the NFL does, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they do. They get to the playoffs, and now, it's so. There's got to be a lot of conversations. My biggest question is who's in the room having those conversations?
I think the TV gods are.
Right? Yeah, I guess so. And that's where I think we have to come up with what's our primary outcome that we're looking for. Is it maximizing revenue? Then the TV gods should have a major seat at the table. If it's some of those other things that I happen to believe that there are the value of sport and excitement in communities and rivalries and all those kinds of things, then I'm not so sure that the football media gods should have quite as big a voice. And um, so I don't know. It's going to be interesting. It's not unlike our world is interesting right now. The world of intercollegiate athletics is interesting right now, and um, we have to just remember the only thing constant is change, and sometimes what you need to learn from the most is your mistakes. And how can we do this better? I mean, isn't that what you did every time you went and watched the film after the game?
Exactly.
Yep.
Sure, you talked about what you did well,
Mm-hmm.
but the thing you really focused on was what do we need to do better? And I hope a conversation, and I can say this because I was college president. I'm sure it wouldn't be popular amongst the college presidents, but I'm not sure the college presidents should lead the discussion. Their world is so much bigger than athletics. They have so many things that are on their plate that I don't know if they have the time or the emotional energy or anything else to really be able to sit down and have as much sound input um, as I think we need right now. But, again, I'm no longer a college president, so I'm sure, your next Instagram or whatever will be from some college president not happy. But I'm just not sure that that's the group.
I'm sure you'll be getting the call, so you'll be relevant if the opportunity comes up. Just really, before wrapping up, I don't know. That's basically it for the questions. Just want to turn it over. Do you have any stories or fun facts or anything to share with the listeners before we start to wind things down?
No, it's amazing how fast time goes. Danny said we'll be on about an hour, and it's amazing how fast this hour's gone.
We don't have to stop. I mean, we might as well. I think we're getting close. We got about 10 more minutes. Why quit now? So we got 9 minutes now. So we got to finish this thing off. We can't cut short of 2 hours. I mean, it's 3rd and 4. We need to get 5 yards.
This is
the
longest podcast in the history of America.
Kurt, you have one last thing to share?
You guys are young.
Yeah. No, the last 2 things for me, Coach. I mean, number one, you talked about it earlier when you got to Youngstown State and you walked in that gym and you felt like that was your paradise. You created that for us. You and your wife and her family created that for us when we were there and we walked in the Watts Center for the first time. Yep. We went in there before we were even allowed in there. I think it was still taped off, and the tape, as is typical in Youngstown, kind of fell off a little bit. And we walked in, and I remember Sal took a picture. My hands were like LeBron, in Cleveland at the time. And I'm like, this is the greatest place in the world. So, I mean, paradise exactly was what you created. And formally, we would like to thank you because I think us 3, Sal, Kyle, I think we might have been the first players and coaches that went in there, whether we were allowed or not.
Yeah.
It was funny when we were practicing for the playoffs every year. I used to tell the guys, hey, someday we're going to have an indoor. Now what I didn't tell them was that you won't be here, but and
we got it.
And then when we had the good fortune that we could be helpful and try to get the impetus behind getting one built, I think the university did a great job in really making it a good one, and the impact that thing has had, with the numbers of high school track meets and all the sports being a chance. Every sport on campus recruits to the Watts Center. It was it was special. It became even more. I thought of it as a selfish football coach. If it's lightning out, we can go practice, or if we're in December, and then we can go in there and practice. But what it's meant for the entire institution, and for the number of people from far and wide that's the reason they come to campus, is to take part in events that are at the Watts Center. It's that there's no question. It's that's where we did all of our recruiting for regular students. We'd have 1,000 prospective students in there, and they'd be looking around just like you guys did. And this place must be pretty cool if you have something like this. And so yeah, no doubt. I appreciate you bringing up the Watts Center, because that was I remember talking to Ellen and her folks and saying, hey, you got to trust me on this. This can make an impact on our campus. And what year did it open? Like 8 or 9? Or
no, that was the
11,
camp of 11. Training camp of 11, because we did go in there
2 winners
in 2010.
10, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Was it 10? Summer of 10?
No, well, we were in there before it opened officially, but
yeah. But we were in there. We were in there in training camp.
11 and 12, the winners were those. So we had 2 rounds of 6 a.m.s where we were in that facility versus being in the gym.
In the snow.
In the snow, yes.
That's
Frozen
right.
hands.
You're right, yeah.
But we did go in there for training camp of 11 before it was cleared. Mm-hmm. You guys are on the field, and the fire marshal and the YSU police chief come in. They're like, what are you guys doing? And we're like, we're having practice. And they're like, you got to go tell coach we're shutting it down. So I'm like the ops guy. I'm thinking, you want me to go tell Coach Wolford right now in the middle of, you got to get out of here. The fire chief was like, it hasn't passed code. You got to get out of here. I'm like, yeah, good luck with that one. We're in the period 12 or something. Like, yeah.
No,
Coach, really quick
we
before
make sure we don't get too soft and go in there when the weather's.
Yeah. I promise we were tough. I promise we were
Well,
tough.
we had 6 fans that lined the back of the building there, and they were always turned off. So it gets hot in there. Just,
Okay.
we never turn the fans on.
Gotcha.
But Coach, really quick before we wrap it up, I on a personal thank you. I'm sure you get stopped all the time, people wanting to say hi to you, and I can recount every time that I've ran into you, going back to 8th grade football camp down in Columbus, and I ran into you at Chick-fil-A on 18 in Montrose one night, and I was wearing my Block Y, and we had a short little conversation. I think you're getting milkshakes with your grandson or something. And, one thing that stuck out to me was I took my nephews to the Illinois State game this past season, and I was showing them around the stadium, and you and your wife were walking down the hallway, and I really do not like to, stop and, draw attention to somebody. I know you're just trying to get upstairs and watch the football game, but I introduced them to you, and I said something dumb like, "Hey, do you guys know who this is?" And they're young, and you had said, "No, how would they know who I am?" And I was thinking, that's a good point, but one day they will, because of everything that you've accomplished and the way that you've accomplished it. And I just wanted to say thank you for always taking a minute or two, always to just have that conversation. And I'm sure I know I'm not the only person that stopped you to say hello or introduce himself to you. So I can imagine that it happens often. So I just want to say thank you for that, because I know those 2 boys will grow up one day and be like, "Oh yeah, Uncle Kyle, like we talked to Jim Tressel at YSU the one game," and it just, so thank you again.
My pleasure and my responsibility, just like it is all of yours, right? It's if it weren't for all the people that were interested in what we do or bump into us, and we get to share the good news of Youngstown State and the game of football and just being nice to one another, and that's what we owe the world.
Amen. Good. Yeah.
I was just going to say real quick, since we're taking this to 2 hours, so we still got 2.5 minutes. So it was
2 hours, man.
Again, going back to Secretariat, we flew out to Northern Iowa on a generous donor's plane. We land in Waterloo and we go over to the Unidome. This is only, I don't know, I'm going to say 5 years ago. So we're rolling through the Unidome. No one, we're rolling through, and 3 Northern Iowa students stop and go. They're saying, that's Jim Tressel. That's Jim Tressel. We got to get a picture. And I can hear him, and I know he hears him, but he's walking, and I say, "Come on, give me your phone." They're like, "Coach, can we get a picture with you?" And he goes, "How do you even know who I am? You weren't even born when I was coach." And they're like, "Oh, we know who you are." So like all of us were laughing, and he jumping in a picture, and then Northern Iowa fans are going, "Oh, that's Jim Tressel." And we were thinking, and I think one of the donors said we flew him out here today for some of the magic, because the last time we had beat him in the Dome, you were the coach. So I think we almost pulled it out that day, but he does it often. I know all of us, so many people are with him. Today we were somewhere, and a guy brings in a book, and I found him with a helmet, and he took the time to do it. And he's that's why it's Sal. I think Sal, you deemed him the Godfather. So that's
right.
I'm spending 2 hours with the 90,000 people watching this thing. I'm gonna get stopped more tomorrow. 2 hours worth of fandom here. We got to get through the mall.
Well, let's shut this thing down. Let's transition and lock it up.
Are we already done?
No, we're shutting it down now. So, I think we got all our last words, and everyone's okay with me locking it up?
Lock it up.
All right.
All right. Audience, believe it or not, Coach, there are people in the live stream that have been with us the whole 2 hours. So thank you very much for you guys. And, of course, thank you to the Godfather for everything, your time, 2 hours. That's incredible, very generous. We'll have you back on probably a year from now to give you some time to recoup from this 2 hour journey. But again, thank you, everyone, for watching the Youngstown Penguin Football Podcast. We are on Instagram, Whitetown Penguin Podcast. Please follow us. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And again, we are in football season. We will be back every week, recording every Wednesday night, starting this Wednesday night and all the way through to the end of the football season. As always, that is Kurt Hess. That's Kyle Searle. That's Dan Kopp. And, of course, that is Coach/President Jim Tressel. And I am Sal Gallardo. Thank you for tuning in. And, as always, go Penguins.
Go Penguins.
Here we go.
Thanks, man.